In this video we're going to start looking at what the different terms listed here as comments mean. We're going to be using Python. It doesn't matter what language that you're used to, you should be able to read the language that we're using quite nicely, as the syntax for Python is nice and simple. So to start off with, we're going to talk about what is a procedure. Now in Python we can create a procedure by saying def, and we define a procedure, and that's why we use the term def. And I'm going to define a procedure that just says it does a simple add. So the name of my procedure is going to be add, and for now we just put open brackets and close brackets after it and a colon. This is just syntax, and we'll explain what the open brackets and close brackets mean very shortly. In this procedure we're going to have a job, and all it does is it's going to print out two numbers added together. So I'm just going to say print, and I just want it to print out whatever 2 add 3 is. Now if we go and run this program now, make sure that's saved, we find nothing actually happens. Well, this is weird. So let's just go and take our print statement and let's just try printing it up here. If we run that again, it does print. So we can see, of course, that our procedure for now just simply isn't running. It's not executing this procedure. It's not being called, which is the key term that you should be referring to here. So to make sure we call this procedure to say run this job, then we can simply say the name of the procedure, add, and then the open brackets, close brackets. We don't need the colon. The colon's really to define the fact of following this colon, this is what's in the procedure. So just please note, of course, that with Python we know that this procedure has finished when the indentation goes back to the start line. So everything inside the procedure will be one indent in from the def statement. So in here we create a procedure and then we call that procedure. So let's run that. And that works perfectly now. So procedures are fairly straightforward things in those respects. So hopefully by now we are happy with the term procedure, and that all it is, it's a written job that we can call over and over again to do a job for us. And I think that's as simple as you can say it. So the next thing I'm going to teach you is about arguments. Arguments are things that you can pass into a function. So let's say I didn't always want to add 2 and 3. Sometimes I wanted to add 2 and 3, and sometimes I wanted to add 4 and 7 or any other kinds of numbers. So instead of saying 2 and 3 in here, I'm going to replace them with some variables. Let's just call it x and y for now. Now this x and y are variable names. So what I'd like to be able to do is pass in values for these two things. Now the computer's saying, well, hold on, I haven't heard of anything called x and y before. So if I go and type in here, I'm just going to tell it that you are going to need an x and you are going to need a y. And these go in the brackets here. And these parts here are called your arguments. X and y are two different arguments. In our add call, when we want to call that procedure, we'll need to pass in two values in there. So for example, I could pass in 2 and 4. So if I pass in 2 and 4, the 2 will become the x, and the 4 will become the y, and then we'll do 2 add 4. And it will print the value of what we passed in. If we go and run that, sure enough it prints out 6. So what's a parameter? In fact, a parameter is exactly the same as an argument. It's just simply another name for an argument. And let's just try running the same procedure once more below, and let's try changing this procedure so that it's maybe a 6 and a 10. We'll just pass in two different values here and we'll run that module. And sure enough, it did our add 2 and 4, and it also did our add 6 and 10. So we can call this procedure over and over again with different values in it. And just to be clear here, you don't actually have to pass in integers, for example. You could pass in a variable that's stored an integer. So let's say that x equals 5 and y equals 16. We could say add x and y. And sure enough, it called this sub using 5 as the x and 16 as the y. Now, a common misconception here is that the values that you pass into your procedure are the names that have to be used inside the actual procedure itself. So let's look at an example where that wouldn't be the case. What if I called this first number, and I'm going to call this one second number? When I go to run the procedure and call it, these values just simply change to what I'd like to pass in. So I'd like to pass in the variable first number, and I'd like to pass in the variable second number, but once they get into the function, they're now referred to as x and y, so that we can use those when we need to. And that still works just like so. So the 5 gets passed into, although we call it first number here, whatever is stored inside first number will just become what we renamed as what is stored inside here, and what is stored inside second number will now be stored inside y. At the end of this procedure running, x and y, these values are killed. So just because I've run that procedure, if I then go after this to go and say, well, let's now print out what was the value of x. So if we go down through our program and see what logically happens, we create a procedure. Of course, nothing actually happens with this procedure. It just says, okay, this job exists. We then create a variable to store the first number. We create another variable to store the second number. And then we call our procedure. And we say, right, well, we'll use the first number and the second number. And it passes the first number 5 into the variable x, and it passes the second number 16 into the variable y. It will then add those two together and print those out. It will not keep these values stored now. So when I come to print x at the end, we go and run this, we've got an error message. It's saying there is no such thing called x. And we'll talk a little bit more about why a bit later on, but hopefully that gives you some idea into the first 3 words: procedures, arguments, and parameters.